for having me.
It's good to see you. We have worked on a few occasions before, and most recently, you told me that you are working on Monad. How's that going? What are you doing there?
Yeah, pretty big change for me personally, but a good change. I've been enjoying it quite a bit. I like working with the people there. What they're up to is something I can get behind and stand behind. I'm pretty excited to see what they're shipping lately, and some big announcements just came out, and some bigger ones on the way. So, yeah, good time to be there. In terms of what I'm doing, I'm heading up the security team. So, with every growing startup, security considerations pop up, and they're at the size where they realize they need dedicated team members rather than um, team members doing other things plus security. So I'm one of three on the security team, covering all things security for the foundation and a little bit for the ecosystem. So as much as we can lend a hand, offer advice, or negotiate some deals through vendors and that kind of thing, we help the ecosystem on the security front.
When launch for Monad? Do you have any alpha for us?
No. Stay tuned, I guess it would be the best I can say. That
Nice.
said, there was a public competition announced. So the execution client is now open source. Code Arena is doing, I think it's about a month long, 20 plus day audit competition with a $500,000 prize pool. And what's unique about this one is there's no conditions. So it's not 500,000 if a critical is found, it's just 500,000. So we're hoping that will attract a lot of attention. As you watch projects go live, this is one of the later stages. So you can publicly see some of the prep work unfold.
Amazing. Well, Noah, the reason why we have you here today is there have been a few potentially severe security incidents recently. And in general, it seems to be this constant threat in crypto of something bad happening. And in your opinion, what is the biggest risk to crypto, and how do you assess or put into context of what's been happening recently? Can you give us like an overview?
Cool. Yeah, biggest risk would probably be one of the multi-billion-dollar custodians going down. The likelihood of that happening is razor thin. But yeah, I think there's some of those massive custodians would be a bit of an existential threat. But in terms of like day to day, what are some of the risks that people encounter? There's a deluge of phishing attempts, spear phishing attempts, and other attempts to compromise accounts and devices. Those we see quite commonly, across organizations. And to give an example, there's the common one where you're invited to a podcast from somebody you know, and when you go to log in, everyone's on the podcast because they have AI tools to make it look like people are present. But then there's an audio issue, and you have to click a button to install a codec to upgrade and fix the audio.
Wait, sorry, I think we have an audio issue.
Right.
This was 100% a drainer link we just sent you.
Yeah, hyper suspicious on that one. Yeah, right. Like again,
we now hold 100% of the Monad supply.
Right. But it's surprising, right? Because it's a common thing, and one of the ways that threat is slipping through is they're first compromising the account of someone you know. So this invite may not be a random spam one, which does occur, but it could be somebody you know trying to catch up and say, I'm working with somebody new. They require me to use this software because they're security conscious. And then you click the link and it took over your machine. So that would be one of the more common ones that we're seeing. Yeah, there's.
Can we dive a little bit deeper? What does take over your machine mean exactly? What happens behind the scenes?
Yeah, good question. Something different. Yeah, go ahead.
And like, as a POSIX user, Linux or Mac, I feel relatively safe. But can that happen for a POSIX user as well?
Yeah, definitely, it can. And there's different routes or different degrees to which people are executing malicious payloads. Don't want to badmouth any one vendor, but yeah, Windows has its class of vulnerabilities. Mac and Linux have theirs. recently, there's been some NPM supply chain attacks where they're using NPM as the means of getting malicious payloads onto people's devices. And even looking at what they've done recently, one of those payloads didn't actually touch people's machines. So like the payload landed on developers' machines, but the payload was designed to be published on a website. So like sneak into your code base. And when you're presented with a website, hopefully a DApp was what they were targeting. The payload would swap out any address that you're putting through your wallet. It would swap your, if you're sending USDC to somebody you know and trust, they would swap out the destination address to be their own. So very small payload, very simple payload, and not persistent in any way. So as soon as, it didn't compromise the machine, it compromised the website. And any users visiting that website, it didn't compromise their machine, but if they executed a transaction while the exploit was live, it would swap out the address. And if they were paying attention, when you sign at the last stage on your wallet, you would catch that address is not the address I'm intending to send it to.
Is it true?
What's that?
Is it true that they didn't just swap out the target address, but they actually swapped it out with a vanity address that looked somewhat similar to the original one? And if so, how are they able to create vanity addresses so efficiently, so quickly?
Yeah, good question. They do. So it is using vanity addresses. So if you skim the top and tail, the beginning and the end, it'll look right. And maybe it'll be similarly shaped, or maybe it will be precisely the same at the start and at the end. I thought about this a while ago because mining vanity addresses doesn't take very long if you don't do too many characters. And I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if it's just a few characters, you can do it relatively quickly. So I kind of assume they're doing it on the fly. But then thinking a little bit more, if they're doing massive amounts of exploits in this way, they could mine for like a month, accumulate a whole bunch of addresses, and then just do a similarity analysis to see which of the vanity ones that I've pre-mined match most closely to yours. And tons of similar vanity address attacks like that going on. If you notice in some of the explorers, when you receive funds or send funds, very shortly afterwards, there'd be another one mimicking your address, but it's not quite, and sending some dust to you or sending a fake token away from you. So yeah, that's one part of it that makes it harder to find. So I guess the advice to everyone is when you're signing something, be pedantic. Every single character verify, and don't copy paste. Read where you have your address book, and then read on the device to make sure they line up 100%, because sometimes it's only a few characters toward the middle that would be off.
How dangerous is copy pasting these days? Is there a history of my clipboard on my machine, or is it usually only endangered for the time being of like what can read my clipboard? Can a web app read my clipboard? So if I happen to have a mnemonic or a private key in my clipboard and I'm online, which no one should do, is that dangerous? And on the other hand, if I ever had a mnemonic while being offline in my clipboard, and then I'll copy other things into it, is there still a risk attack vector here?
It depends. So there are tools that can give you a very long history on your clipboard, and people tout it as like an efficiency thing. It's a security threat. Yeah. Go ahead.
Like these additional extensions or tools for convenience that say, hey, you can go back, check your clipboard from 3 months ago. But assuming I use operating system defaults, it's a very it's not persistent, right?
I don't know how long it persists for. I do know, so I use a password manager, and sometimes I have to copy paste from the password manager. If it's acting a little funky, it's not doing the autofill properly. And at some point later, if I repaste, it's not there. So, there is a limit. I'm not precisely sure how big the limit is. And the reason why I don't know depth on that particular topic is because what you want to do is just assume the worst. So in some circumstances, if there's a web app reading your clipboard, or another application, or you've copy and pasted something and you just pasted it in the wrong spot, there's certain types of errors that could be relatively time sensitive in that you have to make the error at the wrong time. There are other classes of exploits and issues that are persistent and all the time. So if you had downloaded something malicious, it doesn't matter how long your clipboard maintains something. As you put it on the clipboard, the wrap, for example, the remote access Trojan, can do some key logging, some secrets searching, and clipboard scanning. So in the extreme case, it doesn't really matter if it's short-term or long-term.
Yeah.
And to put it this way, if a secret touches your machine, you should consider that secret compromised. And that sounds like a ridiculously extreme thing to say, because we have passwords, we have API keys, we have all these sorts of things. But especially in crypto, given the volume of threats and the benefit, if you were to compromise somebody who has a large crypto holding, there's a big payoff in doing so. So the advice for our industry is have more than one devices. One that you would join podcasts on, one that you would look at memes, read emails, go on Twitter, the whole deal. And then a separate one that you only do sensitive operations on. So to your question about clipboard, it wouldn't matter if somebody could read from my clipboard, even for a single moment, and then after I paste it, it's copied over to erase it.
Yeah.
Even in that case, it wouldn't matter, because my day-to-day machine that people would be most likely to phish me on is not something that handles secrets or handles logins to important accounts or handles value.
Okay. I have a question. So when it comes to OPSEC and security, there's a lot of conversation about key hygiene, and you just gave a few examples of how keys become compromised, and that's scary. That's almost, it's at least very inconvenient to operate with hot wallets that are not considered not compromised. And then there's like real world incidents, which in my opinion, most of the time are not related to private key leaks. It's more related to signing bad things with keys that are not compromised, that you maintain. How do you view this in practice? And have you seen the recent Nova incident where a tool that generated custodial private keys on behalf of their users, I don't know if you're familiar with Photon or Axiom, these trading tools which use Nova, and some of these keys were leaked, and the assets, which I think are worth a few million, were stolen. So how would you weigh key hygiene and key compromises versus just like signing mistakes?
Yeah, they're both high priority. And when working with a crypto company, I've done consulting for years as well. So I've worked with a variety of groups, some small, some two-person teams, and some larger. And they're both ridiculously high on the list. The Nova one is quite interesting. I'm not familiar with it, but just from what you described, maintaining custody of other people's secrets is something I see a lot of startups.
Just to add a little bit more context. Yeah, Privy is another one, exactly. But it's essentially like the tool is a trading tool which allows you fast execution of your trading orders. And it does so by accessing, think of it as the mempool, even though Solana doesn't have a traditional mempool, but think of it as the mempool. And in order to do so, it has a bunch of programs, smart contracts, and it operates kind of like on their proprietary infrastructure. So you still have the ability to export the key such that you have access to that wallet. However, the system also has access to that wallet. So it's a hybrid custody model, if that makes sense. And one of these keys was compromised.
Interesting. Yeah, there's varying degrees of like hot to cold wallets that you can conceive of. That sounds like the hottest of hot wallets. and in that it's your actual wallet that they have access to, and in memory in a computer, a server somewhere. They have a server signing on your behalf, rather than say using an HSM or a hardware related tool, or some of the multi-party computation setups. So on when I run into startups that talk about, we need to do it faster, we're going to grab a hold of user keys, we'll generate them for them, we'll house them in our systems, and we can rapidly sign. I try to talk them out of it, because most of the time they're going that route because they're not familiar with other routes in the first place. It's not a must-have for the particular feature set. And in the rare cases where it is, where they must have access in that sense, it's still probably not the right way to have a hot wallet. There are hardware-based solutions. There are multi-party solutions that could and should be used. Yeah, going, I guess, down the list, if you do need hot wallets, there's, just architecturally, they're depending on the system. In Solana, I'm less familiar with than, say, EVM-based systems. But smart contracts exist for a reason. And smart contracts are a really cool way to give people access to your funds with guardrails put in place. And they're programmatic guardrails, because you write smart contracts that only allow privileged callers to do particular things, rather than handing over your key. With the key, they can do anything and everything. And even when they give you your key, you don't know that they've deleted it. You also don't know that they've leaked it. So using keys is a terrible way of doing it. Handing over access to your funds would be one way of doing it, right? Like Coinbase is a centralized operation. They take custody of your funds, but they don't take custody of your secrets. So they're typically holding keys on behalf of users is something to shy away from. Going further down the list, any form of internet connected device that's touching a secret would be considered hot. And there's varying degrees of it, where if it's a web server versus a laptop versus some other more secure methods. Typically, with the clients that I work with, I usher them toward the cold side, where you let smart contracts handle access controls and privileges, and allowing people to interact and trade in new and interesting ways. But then on the signing side, I usher them toward multi-sig hardware devices with multiple parties and strict process to make sure they're not signing the wrong thing.
But even that is my next question. So even having all of that in place and being a large exchange called Bybit, you're still tricked into signing $1 billion worth of transaction. So my question is basically, I'm paranoid when it comes to hardware wallets, in the sense of, like, I don't understand them enough to know if there's a backdoor, if some secret agency has co-developed them and has access to my keys one way or the other. So my default is kind of like, I want to use an open source multi-sig wallet. And let's just go with like Gnosis Safe, which is one of the most common ones on EVM environments. So I'm very comfortable using a Gnosis Safe because I can have a set of hardware wallet signers. So within a multi-sig environment, I'm happy to have hardware wallets as individual signers, just to kind of have diversity in the mixture of signers. How do you assess something like a Gnosis Safe? And let's just take like a 3 out of 5 signer threshold. How do you assess for the crypto user something like a Gnosis Safe? And is it practical? Is it practical? Is it convenient enough? Is it secure enough? What are the risks? And again, despite Bybit using Gnosis Safe, they still got tricked into signing something that was not supposed to be signed. So what's your take on these multi-sig wallets, or squats on Solana? Similar story.
Yeah, the first and foremost, the on-chain self-custody is difficult. So there's no easy way to do it. The easy way to do it is to pay a reputable institution, Coinbase or otherwise. Anchorage is another one. Pay a major institution to take custody for you. That's the easy way to do it. If you're taking control and self-custodying your own assets, there's landmines everywhere, foot guns, landmines. It's easy to step into trouble. So with Safe, I do prefer Safe. So Safe.global, Gnosis Safe on EVM related networks. I'm familiar with the code base. I'm familiar with how it operates. There are some interesting properties. One is that it's a proxy setup. So your address is a proxy that gets its execution logic. So when you run a function or execute a transaction or verify a transaction, the logic is another contract at a different address. And they use a proxy so that you can upgrade at a later time. If there's a bug discovered or new features, you can say, stop pointing to the current implementation and point to a new implementation. And you've effectively upgraded your contract.
Yeah.
In the Bybit scenario, what happened under the hood is that North Korea tricked them into signing a malicious transaction that had the proxy point to a North Korean contract and no longer become a safe. So that transaction made that safe multi-sig no longer a multi-sig. It was wholly a drainer contract. It's kind of funny. They had access controls built in so that only North Korea can do the draining. But it was nothing more than a drainer contract. So the concept of a multi-sig evaporated when they signed that transaction. So the point that I'm making is it's a very powerful multi-sig in that you can upgrade, you can do new and different things. You can add guardrails and restrictions, but you can also be taken over. To your question about, the average user or users being able to do things safely.
Just one sec, Noah. Just to add some context to that. So most listeners are not super technical. So the alternative to the proxy contract would be the factory contract, right? Where in the moment of initiation, it creates an instance of the contract that cannot be changed. So it cannot be updated. It's not flexible, but it's static and it's more secure. What do you think?
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses and really hard to navigate for technical and non-technical users. So the factory pattern would be one contract that produces new contracts. So what it produces could be the proxy style, Gnosis Safe style, or it could be what you're describing is this factory could be producing one contract that's etched in stone. So the feature set, the functionality, any bugs that are in that contract are etched in stone and they're there forever. It prevents you from accidental upgrades or malicious upgrades in the case of the North Korean example. But the trade-off that many have made, including Safe Labs, when they made a decision to use the proxy pattern, one of the trade-offs is that if you have an error, you can't correct it. So it's there permanently forever. You need to
migrate or something, which is inconvenient
and sometimes not possible. Maybe the attacker can steal the funds before you can get people to migrate. So a bit of a trade-off there. Other than that, the contracts are largely safe. There are some powerful things you can do with them. So some foot guns do exist, and they have a nice UI. And for the Bybit scenario, the UI was front and center of what went wrong. Interesting, we talked about those like barrage of ongoing phishing attacks. There was one on a DevOps engineer from the Safe side. And this DevOps engineer was tricked into downloading a malicious Docker container. It wouldn't work. He was helping somebody. I don't know if it was a job interview or if it was just, hey, you're into open source. Let's nerd out on a shared interest. So the attacker convinced them to modify a Docker setting on their work laptop to run the container. And as soon as they updated that setting, then the attacker had control of their system. What they did with that control, and to my point earlier about having two devices, this individual did not. So they were messing around day to day, doing their day-to-day activities. Their machine was compromised, and their machine had access to unilaterally upgrade the Safe global UI. And it's really interesting from a timeline perspective. A month or two before, I had talked to a client and I said, when you go to this UI, assume it's compromised. And they kind of did some hand waving and they weren't really believing me. And then a couple of months later, it was compromised. And what's really interesting is it was compromised for quite a long period of time. So we had a conversation about, if the safe website is compromised, here are some things you need to do to also be safe. We had that conversation while it was currently compromised. So that was the first half of it, is compromising the website. What the website did was present the information that the signers wanted to see, but then presented a hash for the transaction. So now you're getting low level. The to, the from, the amount, the currency, all of that was as expected. So it was presenting the information the users desired to have presented. But then the hash, the message hash and the domain hash were malicious. And an average user doesn't know what those two words mean. And unfortunately, those are the things that when you sign on your hardware wallet, you don't see the from, the to, the amount, the currency, you see the hashes. And the North Korean attackers relied on that discrepancy. So the website would propose a transaction to take over the multi-sig when the users thought it was a very simple, small amount currency transfer. When they signed on the device did show the malicious hash. It's just they weren't checking. They were checking the on the website information. Multiple signers signed. So what that tells me is that everyone had a broken process with a gap, or which would be terrible, is people just sign things without looking. And that is something I've encountered with clients. So I can't say for a large scale organization, but I know for small scale, first time in crypto handling some funds, you get the founder, the marketer, and maybe some operations person who just say, yeah, we need to send these funds. You queue up the transaction. I trust you. When you hear the words, I trust you, that tends to be a red flag that there's an operational security issue. And then they blindly sign it and hope that things worked out for the best. I hope that's not what happened with Bybit. I hope they would have had more checks and balances in place. But just to point it out that when you're dealing with multi-sig signers, you have to instill in every single signer that you are the last line of defense. If any one of those signers had discovered that the hash on the website is not the hash that should be produced given that data, the exploit would have been detected and prevented, even with a malicious website. So where we go with a lot of these security topics is discuss the disaster scenario. So worst case scenario, I'm Noah, my laptop is compromised. Great. You know, the attacker gets a participation badge because my laptop can't access anything. I'm restricted in what I can access. This machine can only join podcasts. It can't access any critical systems or update websites. But you plan for that disaster case and make the assumption that assume my laptop is compromised, assume this website that I rely on for multi-sig purposes is compromised. And if those are both true, what else can be put in place to make sure I'm safe? And on a technical front, there are things you can do. So even with the Bybit scenario, what we're coaching projects on is, even in that disaster scenario, here's how you can detect that what you're signing is what you intend to sign.
Maybe to move down a few stages. I mean, like most of the people listening to the pod and like that we are interacting with day to day are either like pro-tail crypto users, very active retail, or sometimes involved with smaller institutions. So like most of them do not have a custodian or like a professional technical background to like triple, quadruple check everything before they sign a transaction. So are there some like, I'm very active in the DeFi dojo. It's like a DeFi yield syndicate. And there have been several instances over the past year where people just woke up one day and a bunch of their wallets have been drained. Usually like all of them on one device, or like these isolated instances where an individual application gets compromised or a front end gets compromised. That kind of makes the round on crypto Twitter pretty fast by now. So I think that if you are paying attention to the space as a whole, you are able to avoid these with a reasonably high probability if you just like have a couple of alerts on and like notifications for like security focused Twitter accounts, etc. But like, what are the risk vectors that could lead to a compromise of your device, especially if you're handling hot wallets? And if you're handling hot wallets, are there any ways to mitigate the risks of like private key leakage or like any other risk vectors that could lead to like draining the entire wallet?
Some, and where I run into an issue with advice around that is because there are things you can do to catch and be immune to low quality attacks. What I fear is if I coach people too much on how to avoid the low quality attacks, they get confident that they won't get attacked. And that is what happens is people have been in this industry for years. They have a few things that they do reliably well, and they think I'm safe. I can actually put in, a house worth of dollars onto my mobile device because I'm safe in what I do. And it's ridiculously dangerous. Don't do that. So I can definitely answer the question by giving some tips on particular things. But one note to really point out is that there exists a class of vulnerabilities called no-click. So like zero-click vulnerabilities and one-click vulnerabilities. And those, there's very little you can do. If somebody can get an image onto your device, they can send you a text message. They can send you a message on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp, I believe, was a vector for some time for the no-click vulnerabilities. Famously so, Jeff Bezos himself was compromised. So if you think of who has a world-class security operation and world-class training on how not to get compromised, Jeff Bezos was compromised. So if somebody does want to attack you and you're dealing with nation state level attackers, they can burn 0 days on getting access to you. And there's very little you can do to prevent it. So what you can do outside of that is know that if somebody really wanted to get access to my device, they could. And just to give another example, a less sophisticated example, is they could steal my laptop. So there's even a crude way where, I have all the sophisticated detection, virus tools, OPSEC practices. Somebody stole my laptop. They have access to it. They saw me type in the password on a camera over my shoulder. So going from the how to not get phished to the what to do if my laptop is compromised, you can do things like have multiple factors of authentication, never put secrets on your laptop, never hold value on your laptop. And what you really want to coach people on is if an attacker attacks your phone and has full control, so they can execute code, they can read, write, they can touch buttons. If they have full control over your phone, you want them to still not have everything they need to steal your funds. And the ways in which you could do that is the hardware wallets. You need the phone plus the hardware wallet if you have multi-sig. The multi-sig could be 2 of 2, my phone plus my hardware wallet. So you got to get me twice. Or 3 times, my laptop, my phone, and my hardware wallet device. So that's where I'd coach people to go. On the giving real advice, it's funny because you said DeFi Dojo or Yield Dojo. There's the Phishing Dojo, which is a project by the Red Guild, which is a really cool exercise because I had to do it more than once to get through without any missed questions. They put phishing attempts in front of you and say, is this safe? Is this not safe? Or which of the following are true? It's multi-choice. So they kind of you should be able to get perfect. Even I couldn't get perfect the first time I did it. It shows you emails that resemble phishing emails. And it's a huge issue because if there's a conference, for an example, and I signed up for the conference, in and around the time I sign up, there's also people sending phishing emails from the conference, looking like the conference provider. And there's ways of telling that it's a malicious email. But even if you go through those methods, there may have been something you missed. So even going through successfully the Phishing Dojo and identifying 100% of this is phishing, this is not, there's still a chance that someday you could click the wrong thing. So definitely the non-technical folks, send them to the Red Guild. The Phishing Dojo is a really cool exercise. And there's a couple more floating around out there. But that one's really good for awareness, just to know there's all these different ways. But to really belabor the point, if you just assume your device is compromised and have that as your starting point, you never would have put 6-7 figures on your device. Luckily, I don't have 7 figures. That's that's my don't get hacked strategy is just don't have a lot of money and then they can't steal a lot. But if you do, what's that? Yeah, be poor, right? Like easy solution. Even if they hack you, you lose $200, who cares?
I mean, jokes aside, would you say that it is at least somewhat of a risk mitigating strategy if you have spread your funds across wallets, even though these wallets might be sitting as hot wallets on the same device. Like, are hackers or like phishers trying to target individual wallets and try to like source it to an individual device or an email address or whatever? So just having a few unassociated wallets where you spread your funds across, and these wallets have no like point of mutual interaction where you could say with certainty that these are related or they like belong to the same like DeFi Sybil cluster or whatever. Like, does that increase security, or is it like, I mean, it helps like 1%, but it doesn't really make a meaningful difference?
It depends on the threat that you are trying to mitigate. So being kidnapped, and somebody knows you have a particular net worth, there's only so much you can do. Somebody compromising a device, it's a stranger on the other side of the world compromising your device. Sure, if you have a little bit on the device and a lot several other places, then yeah, the device being compromised limited the damage. And that is a really good strategy. But yeah, depending on the threat actor, if law enforcement is a perfect example. If you have money spread in different places and you're hiding it from law enforcement due to some legal proceeding, don't tread there. That's a terrible strategy. But theft from bad actors, not a bad strategy. My primer on multi-sigs is to tell everyone to use multi-sigs, but then to remind them why multi-sigs are useful. And there's two main reasons in my mind. One is to prevent theft. And we talked about that earlier on this call. But the other is to allow key loss. So if you do have a multi-sig wallet and it's a 3 of 5 as an example, you're allowed to lose 2 keys and still have full access to your funds. You kind of want to move them somewhere and add more keys if you lost 2. But if you put it all on one device, one hardware wallet, and hardware wallets are electronic, say it goes in the water, it gets cooked, those funds are gone if you didn't have a proper backup. So to your question about spreading out your funds into many different places, if you spread them out into too many places, you do run the risk of forgetting how to access them or losing access to those funds in different places. And I've heard of that, actually. There's somebody who was in crypto long before me, years and years before I started in 2017. But they had lost access to an encrypted wallet that had $20 million. And just when they encrypted it, it wasn't 20 million, just through value accrual. And they could not for the life of them get into it. So yeah, you do run the risk if you spread yourself too thin. But yeah, I don't use custodians myself. I know some DeFi projects who do. The costs associated with them, I don't know if they have minimum deposit requirements. They may or may not. But I know many use the custodians to actually earn. If you think of USDC sitting in an on-chain wallet, there's no yield. There is yield if you go through some of the qualified custodians. So they're motivated to have you use their services rather than a big barrier there. That said, the reason we got into this industry is not for centralization and custodianship. So yeah, where my recommendations go is be aware of the phishing attempts, do the phishing dojo. Know that if somebody emails you, even if it's someone you know and they want you to click on something, you probably don't want to click on it. If you have messenger apps, you don't want to auto download images, which is kind of funny because we're all in Telegram groups and Signal groups where they're sharing images left, right, and center. But you actually want to disable auto download because that prevents the 0 and 1 click attacks. Yeah, there's like hypervigilance that you can get into, but at the end of the day, I always fall back on this laptop is ephemeral. If it was compromised, I can throw it away and get a new one. And if it's compromised, they can't steal anything from anyone because I make sure people don't give me access to things.
So what would you say are the most impactful things that somebody can do in like day-to-day crypto key wallet, whatever, OPSEC management, especially on the like preventing total exploit, other than just like being aware of what the app is currently compromised? So like what I've heard out of the last 40 minutes of the conversation is that basically like the most important thing to just avoid any external exploits, phishing, malicious software is to use a completely separate device just for crypto, right? And
Yeah.
then, I mean, ideally in the combination with hardware wallets, and these ideally set up as a multi-sig. So let's say you don't have hardware wallets because you interact dozens of times with like 20 different DeFi protocols every single day. You don't have a separate device. Does having a multi-sig still help, just maybe between different Chrome profiles, or let's say your laptop and your phone? Is this still something where you would say it is worth the trade-off between the additional inconvenience of transacting versus the security you get in return?
It would for sure. And if you think of the like a value ladder, so my phone, what are the Apples going for? $1,500, something like that. So the phone itself is worth $1,500. You can put $1,500 on the phone, and if you lose the phone, not a big deal. Replacing the phone costs you that amount. If you're going up to the value of a car, tens of thousands of dollars, you probably don't want to have it on your phone. You want it somewhere more secure. And to your point, multi-sig can be simple. So multi-sig could be my laptop and my phone. And now it's separated. You have to compromise me twice, which is going to be a lot more difficult. If you have it more than a car, if you're talking house-sized value, you really want to be more cautious. And maybe you, as an individual, and depending on the trader and trading activity, you can't do this. But if it's worth as much as a house, you don't want to have unilateral access, because then somebody can kidnap you, steal your funds. There's plenty of different ways that a motivated threat actor could compromise you, physically and digitally. If it's more than a house, like lifetime changing amounts of money, you do want to have a very strict operational security practice. And you should be involving technical people in that conversation, people you know and trust, or third parties who you trust through reputation of the firm. If it's lifetime changing amounts of money, you probably don't want to be walking around with that in your pocket.
So no golden ledger necklace carrying around.
Right. The funny thing about those is probably like $300 worth of right. A few NFTs they paid 10,000 for, and they did a nosedive, and now they're hundreds of dollars. But yeah, don't do that. Don't advertise. Keep a low profile. But realistically, some of the founders who I do talk to, I just talk to them about let it be known that you don't have access, and then actually put things in place to make sure you don't have access. Nobody wants to spend a month trying to target you in a very sophisticated way if you have no access to funds. It's other people. You can call them and they won't give it to you because you didn't follow the procedure. Think of that ladder. You get more sophisticated and more annoying to do a transaction, the more value that's associated with that transaction. And I can give you an example of where somebody went wrong. Celsius, handling hundreds of millions of dollars on the UI compromised. I think they had a MetaMask, and the reason I think they had a MetaMask is because this was a UI related exploit. But they clicked the wrong thing, they signed the wrong thing. They thought they were claiming rewards, so they didn't think value was leaving their wallet, and they signed something saying approve an attacker to have all of my funds. Celsius did that and lost $100 or so million. If you're dealing with that amount of money, you don't want to be doing things on a single device where a single compromise can cost it. If it's your money, that's just devastating to lose that much. And if it's somebody else's money, it's, there's, if you're responsible for other people's money, you arguably want to go more extreme in your protections.
Is there any unavoidable differences or difficulties in types of executing certain transactions, or just the overall user experience of on-chain transactions, especially if you're doing transactions very frequently, playing around with test nets, airdrop campaigns, etc.? Is there anything you cannot do, or which a multi-sig makes it exponentially more difficult to execute in terms of transaction costs, especially if you're dealing with arbitrage or swaps, where the quota changes between the approval on the first wallet and then the second wallet that is, let's say, a 2 out of 3 or 2 out of 2 multi-sig. Like, is there anything that is really going to make your life difficult if you prioritize security?
A couple things, yeah. So your ability to like click, click, click. I know some of the projects take custody of funds because the ability to respond to a click is much faster than in verifying a signature. So those rapid, high frequency, especially programmatic, where you're involving bots, you give the bot access to your key. So there are some things where, yeah, doing things in a more secure way prevent you from doing high frequency activities. Where I go with that is if it's low value, don't sweat it. You know, you can lose a couple grand, and like any job in the world, you can someday earn a couple grand again. But if it's a lot of money, if you're dealing with $100 million, maybe you can spend 50 grand consulting with a firm to have you set up with a programmatic hot wallet that will do things in a secure way. And one way of doing it, just as an example, is having 2 separate servers, 2 separate cloud hosts, so Amazon and Microsoft, and 2 separate implementations, each responsible for high frequency signing. And if they both agree, then the transaction goes through. And if one gets compromised, the other one should disagree and protect you. If you're dealing with ridiculous sums of money, those types of extreme protections and provisions aren't such a big deal. If you're down lower on the size and the volume, just separate it out a little bit. Your laptop and your mobile is safer than your mobile alone. Yeah,
I think,
friends don't let friends buy shit coins, I guess would be the other one. Like you talk about security, but like, yeah, things you intentionally tried to put all your money into can also take a nosedive.
Yeah, I guess like most people listening to this pod are somewhere between lower 6 to like mid 7, maybe lower 8 figures. Usually individuals, usually like seasoned crypto users have been in the space for, let's say, at least 3 years or a little more. Pretty active on chain. So like, what would you say is the minimum standards and minimum requirements everybody in that category should have in place?
In that vein, there's almost too many options. I find it hard to give a clear recommendation to people because there's so many different options. And to your point, I now end up saying you can leave amounts on a trusted exchange up to some, like it's insured up to some amount, right? If you leave your funds on Coinbase or Kraken. But like, what is your go-to setup without like having to ask 200 different questions on their preferences?
Yeah, I, prior to FTX collapsing, bought a little bit of a crypto index fund that was like an on-chain ERC20 token, where the money that they received to purchase those tokens, they invested in a basket. So there was the top 20 by market cap on CoinMarketCap, and they would rotate. So if somebody left the top 20 and a new one came in, they would rebalance. That was a custodian-like operation, and lost all of it because FTX collapsed, and there might have been one of the casualties that FTX knocked out was also involved in some of the trading that they were up to. So know that, yeah, if you do get involved with a custodian that's not insured, and some of the insurance schemes are a little flaky. Just as an example, there's some insurance for custodians where if you can demonstrate gross negligence, then your funds are insured. If you can't, then your funds are gone. And demonstrating gross negligence is an extremely high hurdle to be able to demonstrate. So yeah, know that I do throw around the term custodians, but there are risks with custodians, and we've all seen that with FTX. And we had talked about it before XTX, and then it happened, and now we still do it. The blanket advice I would give is to understand your own risk profile. So if you lost your stack, how devastating would that be? But on the flip side, if you lost the ability to get into a deal quickly, how devastating would that be? Or an ARB opportunity or some trading opportunities. There is some risk reward. To be able to respond quickly, you do take on some risk. Begs the question, do you need to risk your whole stack to be able to move quickly? Or can you divide up your stack where some of it is not actively traded, or actively managed, and that's held in a very cumbersome way, in which I have to leave my house, and I involve multiple people, and then and only then can the funds move, versus smaller amounts. If you are trading your whole stack on an ongoing basis, you've decided your risk tolerance is quite different from some other people. So scale it up and down to your risk tolerance. Betting your whole stack on a particular coin can lose it as well, which is a very different risk profile than I've spent years accumulating this through slow and deliberate savings, and I really don't want to lose it. And most people are probably going to be somewhere in the middle of that.
Would you say that as soon as your private key ever touches your machine, so like if you use any hot wallet, even though you never paste the seed phrase to your clipboard or anything, would you automatically assume like that is a blatant security risk? It doesn't matter if you just like store it on paper in a safe afterwards. Like as soon as it has ever touched your machine, like consider it a very high risk operation? Or how would you say like the entire hardware versus software wallet discussion compares on that?
Yeah, I do well with simple rules. So yeah, the simple rule of it touch my device, it's compromised is a good way to think about it. And I do operate that way. And it's annoying because I have old things that, I don't know, I bought an ENS domain ages ago, and now there's an airdrop, again, ages ago, but had to dig up all these old, what I thought had sunset these accounts, but they were still being given value by people other than myself. But for yourself, yeah, if it touches your laptop, if it touches your smartphone, simple rules, just assume it's compromised. It might not be, but it's a good heuristic to apply. And the issue that you run into with that topic in general is you never know that it's been compromised. So like if my car was stolen, I look outside and my car's not there, I know my car has been stolen. But if somebody duplicates your key, you don't know it's been stolen. Sometimes people find out when they get a windfall. The key had $2 on it. Nobody did anything about it. But now that it has $10,000, now the attacker drains it. So yeah, the big issue with private key compromise is there's no indicator that the key has been stolen. So it's safest and easiest just to rotate it out and no longer use it. Keep a backup somewhere in case you get an airdrop. But for practical purposes, assume it's compromised.
Yeah, like I'm out of all three of us by far the least technical person. I have no technical ability. So like that is one of these vectors I am somewhat paranoid about, simply because like I wouldn't notice it. I wouldn't know how to prevent it properly. I wouldn't notice if my machine is compromised or anything. Again, like if it's some phishing thing, like I can at least kind of reason, okay, this is how it came to be. If it's a D app that got exploited and just in that moment I happen to interact with it, and like 5 minutes later it gets shared on crypto Twitter, I can at least kind of identify the mistake that has been made in a wallet that I control. But whereas on the machine level, it's much harder. So like I usually try to rotate wallets like every couple of months through like one of a few centralized exchanges left that require no KYC, just to like leave as little trace as possible. But then on the other hand, like if you engage in like airdrop farming campaigns with like refer links, whatever, like the public key, like the public address will like make its rounds out and about anyway, unless you're like super paranoid and have like a hidden stack. So would you say that just people knowing your public address poses a major risk? So would you always like, especially if you're kind of, I wouldn't consider Owner and me public figures in crypto, but like we are both involved with like public entities, and like people could try to backtrace certain actions to our wallets that we've been talking about on our podcast, etc. So would you just the awareness that a certain address belongs or may belong to a certain person, does that already pose a major risk?
Yeah, good question. So it's funny because I learned this from Owner. The thing about operational security, if you're thinking privacy, and in the context of wanting to be anonymous on chain, as an example, or on social media, it's not something that can be backfilled. So you can't become anonymous. You need to begin anonymous. So on chain, if somebody had sent you funds or you participated in an angel round and received funds, like people do know this account is associated with you, and you can never remove that association. You can hope that others don't learn about it, but you can't remove and confidently eliminate. So yeah, OPSEC in that sense, for the purpose of anonymity, you cannot backfill. Yeah, being a public known figure with significant funds can make people targets. I know when SIM swapping was super hot, in that it was happening all the time, and attackers had a pretty good means of being able to SIM swap people. There were a lot of public figures who were known to have a lot of funds getting SIM swapped, and then their exchange accounts at least attempted to be compromised. So being known to have funds is not necessarily advised. Yeah, it in and of itself, it's the nature of the risks. So if you go to conferences, you're a public figure, and there are people trying to do the physical attacks, being publicly identifiable and known to have a lot of funds at your fingertips can make you a target. There was the CEO, or was it the CTO? I'm drawing a blank, but it's the Ledger, one of the Ledger founders. So Ledger is a hardware wallet device, but they built a hardware wallet because they're involved in crypto and thought they had a really good solution for some of the things we're talking about. There was a kidnapping that occurred where they were held for ransom. So they were known to be ahead of a successful crypto related company, and the dots are pretty close together. If you're in that position, they were a kidnapping target. Luckily, the attacker didn't succeed. But yeah, as much as possible, if you hit a home run in this industry, don't tell everyone, and don't make it publicly known. I have not hit a home run. I still work. I'm still earning, saving, plodding away day by day. But if I ever did hit a home run, yeah, I would want to make sure that I'm not well known as somebody who has a bunch of. I want to make sure that I'm not well known as a desirable kidnapping target.
Yeah, so very logical. Even in non-crypto context, I think you really see a difference between the real whales that run billion-dollar companies that don't want their children to be on social media or even be seen on television. You don't see those people flexing with anything really. Versus, the, let's call them 7-8 figure person who likes to flex with their Rolex and their sports cards or wherever. So I think generally, like, to some extent, obfuscation and not like flexing is a good OPSEC strategy. I fully agree with that.
Yeah. And the Rolex is a fun one because what's that? 10K minimum?
So it's not even that much. It's just about like the like I understand a Rolex. I mean, Rolex is not even anything special. There's like way crazier watches like a Patek or Richard Mille or whatever. But like as a speculation object and asset, I find it much more interesting than as a wearable. As a wearable, I just don't understand it. It's like I have a Whoop, so I don't understand expensive watches.
Yeah, I like the getting into a different topic. The mechanical nature of them is quite interesting, but if somebody were to take it from you, that would be you kind of want it to be as a percentage of your net worth, a very small part of it.
No, here's the thing. It's generally approved of for real Rolex owners to wear fake Rolexes. Oh, really? And I find that hilarious. Yeah. So there's basically the notion of like fake Rolexes are weird unless you have a real one and you just don't want to wear the real one because it's way too valuable. Then it's fine. And I just find that so weird. It's like it doesn't make any sense to me.
So you still have the conversation starter, but then you can afford the loss of the fake one.
It's not that they walk around saying it's fake. It's like it looks so real that at a glance you look it's real. But like the moment you would go into the embarrassment of wearing a fake Rolex, you always have the card of like, look, I know it's fake. I do this on purpose. I have a real one and I'm not wearing it. Obviously, it's way too expensive, right? And I don't know. That's what I've heard. I never owned expensive watches, so I'm not really in the game.
I mean, from occasional conversations with the Rolex owners in my friend circle, I would doubt that this is an accepted practice. Like, you're gonna get mocked. Like, not literally in terms of being robbed, but like mocked in terms of you wear a fake one. And like, I
No,
think in
it
terms
is an accepted practice. It's also like if you think about like what's the PSA 10 grading for watches in terms of like their usage signs and stuff like that. If you wear the fake one, the real one is going to be new, so it has a higher resale value. So I think it's a very accepted practice.
Yeah, no scratches, no wear and tear. That's interesting.
I mean, I definitely heard it more than once. I think it's an accepted practice. Maybe it's weird, but
people do it, but it's not like everybody does it. I would say maybe like, I don't know, 5%, 10%. Like
okay, could be.
At a certain stage of wealth, if somebody like robs you of your 10K Rolex, you don't care. Like, it would be more embarrassing to be exposed wearing a fake watch than losing 10K in like some long tail robbery probability.
I don't think it's the loss of the value. I think it's the probability of getting robbed in the first place. To Noah's point, he just mentioned that CEOs should say publicly that they don't have access, right? And it's almost as if like the person would say publicly, I own these things, but I only wear fake ones. So you can rob me, but you're gonna get a fake one. I don't know. Anyways,
yeah, the important part is to make sure you don't have access, but then definitely let it be known. It won't prevent everything because some people won't believe you. But if somebody tries to rob you, they get $0, then it discourages the next one at least. It's a weird industry we live in. The like data being literal value is an odd paradigm. And it's one of those things where attacking this industry is time and time again profitable. So people keep doing it because it's profitable to attack this industry.
Yeah, I think it introduces a lot of risk we are just not very fit in dealing with. Just if you look at the evolution of the human brain, like it does not come very intuitive nor natural that somebody can like more or less ruin your life, or at least like hurt you significantly by exposing or getting access to something that is completely intangible and does not like exist in the physical world, to put it that way. Maybe as a closing question, because we are pretty much at the hour, how do you see the landscape of crypto security and like especially security risks evolve in the future? Like over the last, let's say, 24 months, it seems like more has moved towards, oh, you have to be careful about phishing attacks and smart contracts and like all of these like big exploits we've seen in bridges or DeFi applications that still exists, but in proportion it has decreased quite a bit if you compare to last cycle. So right now, like again, specifically geared towards active on-chain users, like what are the things you should pay attention to right now in the future, and what that you've learned in the past might be a little bit outdated, and what are some new risks on the horizon you should be aware of?
High level, as an industry, we've matured in that we believe broadly as a group that you should audit your code. And before there was some argument of we don't have the money, test and prod was a thing. So that's out, that's gone, that's over. So that's great. If you're a DeFi user, most of them are trained to look for audit reports or just know and ask that it's been audited. So that's new. Where the attacks are starting to shift, if you look at the majority of funds lost over I think it was past 6 months or 12 months, most of it was through key compromise. So all the things that you've been asking about. So you're asking the right questions, but that's a bit of a shift. In the past, it was errors in code bases that caused funds to be lost. So now it's on the users, and sometimes those users are the protocols themselves. So you'd be, as a DeFi user, wanting to ask new questions. If it's upgradable, is it a single hardware wallet that can upgrade this contract? In which case, a single hardware wallet can rug. If it's a multi-sig for the protocol, then it's safer. You trust the multi-sig participants. So that's a bigger shift. On the implementation side, if any of these viewers are working for startups or protocols that are launching something new, supply chain attacks are always a big deal. They're in the news lately, but even before these past couple of weeks, they were a persistent threat in a way of sneaking into systems that you shouldn't be allowing malicious actors into. Supply chain. And when I say supply chain, it's not the code that you write, but it's the code that your code relies on as dependencies and libraries. But even worse, it's the code that those dependencies rely on. Where very often a compromise can land a malicious payload onto your machine. So supply chain would be, if anyone's involved in a startup on the tech front, supply chain is definitely top of mind for risks.
All right, Noah, thank you very much for spending a little over an hour with us. Very, very insightful, as expected, to be honest. I know you for a long time. I hope the others enjoyed that too. And yeah, would love to see you another time again, maybe a post-Monad launch.
Awesome. Yeah, I enjoyed the questions. It's a cool subject matter that you guys are getting into. So I appreciate you taking the time to invite me over and chatting with me.
Yeah, was great having you on, especially because that, like, for me personally, it is a topic, like, given I have zero tech background, that is always somewhat obscure, but still, it's kind of like one of these Damocles swords hanging above your head 24/7, and you don't really know how to hedge yourself against that. I mean, yeah, there's no foolproof way to avert these risks, but at least, we should all try to manage them thoroughly. And I think this episode has had a lot of useful info for that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's great chatting with you again.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
You too.